Welcome to Ryan's Running Reviews in partnership with Roadrunner Sports, and today we're taking a look at one of Brooks' most highly cushioned trainers. It's the Ghost Max 2. We're also going to compare it to last year's version V1 to see what changed. Let's run with it. Before we get started, I do want to say these shoes were provided to me by Roadrunner Sports. However, no one had a chance to preview this video, and this file synopsis is my own. I'd also like to say please leave a like on the video and consider subscribing. Here we go. The Brooks Ghost Max is a max cushion neutral daily trainer, as the name obviously implies. However, even though it's a neutral shoe, I found it to be quite stable. Sometimes when you get these higher stack shoes, things can become a bit squirrely, and that was not the case at all. This is a very stable option. Now, I think this works well for walkers, people that want a lot of cushioning, a very smooth rocker geometry. You can fit your orthotics in here, and for runners that maybe want an easy day or recovery day shoe with a lot of cushion, I think that's where the Ghost Max comes in, because Brooks has a lot of running shoes, so I'm going to do my best to explain them. We also have the Brooks Ghost 16, which is, at least on paper, the more moderately cushioned version of the Ghost Max 2. Now, I know they share the same name, they're both the Ghost model. However, my hot take is the Ghost 16 is actually more closely related to the Glycerin 21, which is another one of Brooks Max Cushion shoes. The reason I say this is both the Ghost with its 12mm drop and the Glycerin with its 10mm drop, and the fact that they feel much lighter compared to the Ghost Max, I think represent a more versatile daily trainer compared to the Ghost Max both 1 and 2, which is why I feel like these are more closely related. The midsole foams also feel a little bit more familiar, and the rides I think do have some overlap, where the Ghost Max feels completely different. It's going to be much heavier, has a lower 6mm drop, and in my opinion I think works better for those slower efforts where, like I mentioned before, both the Ghost and the Glycerin are better all-around trainers. So you have a couple different options. If you want a highly cushioned Brooks shoe, you can go with the Ghost Max 2 or the Glycerin, as these are kind of their true thick daily training running shoes. The Ghost Max 2 remains the same price as last year. It costs $150. They also kept the stack height the same, with 39 in the heel and 33 in the forefoot for a relatively low 6mm drop. Like I talked about before, a lot of Brooks running shoes kind of fall into that 10 to 12mm drop range, while the Ghost Max again comes in with a 6mm drop. Even though the stack height and the price remain the same, the weight does go up. Last year the shoe weighed 10 ounces, and this year on the Max 2 it now weighs 10.8. And to put that in perspective, the Glycerin, the other highly cushioned shoe from Brooks, weighs 9.8 ounces, so a full ounce less compared to the Max 2. So we do have a somewhat heavier highly cushioned running shoe. Moving on to the uppers, while they may look similar, I do think Brooks beefed things up here on the Max 2. You have a more substantial toe guard. The tongue does appear to be thicker, has a little bit more padding to it. It is not gusseted, just like we saw last year. The heel counter is much more strict and rigid, and we have additional padding in the heel counter as well. So you just have even more cushioning in the upper compared to what we saw on the Max 1. I will say the shoe does fit true to size, very comfortable. My one minor gripe is I found the toe box to be a bit too pointed. I did have the same issue on the V1, and that continues here on the V2. Plenty of room through the midfoot, didn't feel overly restrictive, and I thought the lockdown was stellar, especially because the heel counter is so strict and you have plenty of padding back there. It just feels like a more plush overall upper compared to V1. And then if we move on to the midsoles, yes, they had the same stack height and drop. However, they do feel quite different, as Brooks did change the foam. Last year on the V1, we had DNA Loft V2, which is a mixture of rubber air and foam. And then this year on the Ghost Max 2, we have DNA Loft V3. I realize that's a lot of different versions and numbers, but it's a nitrogen infused foam, so completely different manufacturing method. And for those of you keeping track at home, yes, both the Ghost and the Glycerin also have DNA Loft V3, that nitrogen infused material. However, after trying the Glycerin and the Ghost Max, I don't think all DNA Loft V3 is created equal, mainly because it feels much softer and squishier in the new Glycerin than it does in the new Max 2. So I would keep that in mind. I think it makes the Ghost Max 2 more approachable, mainly because you get a lot of cushioning, but it's not super unstable, so your foot's not going to roll outwards or inwards. You really do have a somewhat stable neutral experience. And then if we compare this year's midsole to last year's midsole, I do think V1 feels slightly softer with its more traditional EVA foam compared to this year, where it's not as soft but does have a little bit more energy return and spring to it. I also think it's going to last longer. It's a little bit harder to kind of bottom out. You're able to compress the midsole on the V1 fairly easily, while it takes a bit more energy to do that on the V2. So you're going to get a little bit more spring in the midsole, and I do think the longevity is going to be better on the V2 as well. Now, like I mentioned before, it's a fairly stable neutral shoe, and that's for a couple different reasons. Yes, you have a fairly firm max cushion experience. However, you have some foam sidewalls which also keep your foot contained, a really wide outsole platform, very similar to last year, and then the platform itself is going to be somewhat stiff, which kind of helps prevent any excess motion. So that all those different factors work together to give you a decent level of guidance for being a neutral running shoe. For me, the Ghost Max 2 I think works best, especially with the increase to the weight for those easier runs or recovery days. It's also a great casual shoe, which is what I think Brooks partially intended it for anyways. You have a very smooth rocker geometry, and that is nice because the midsole is fairly stiff, so it helps you take advantage of that curvature to the midsole. It's just a nice kind of comfortable, plush, all-around option. Yes, it's a bit heavy, and I do wish maybe the toe box was wider, but it is a nice upgrade compared to last year, and I do expect it to be slightly more durable. Moving on to the outsoles, very similar if not identical to each other. The one minor difference I did see and somewhat feel is in the heel section. You have a deeper kind of groove or a cutout, which kind of acts as like a mini trampoline, which is partially why, in addition to the foam, I think the V2 feels like it has a little bit more energy turn and life to it. But otherwise, plenty of rubber here. I thought the grip was fine, and again, very similar to what we saw last year. Well, that concludes my review. Let me know in the comments what you think of this update to the Ghost Max 2, or would you rather go with the glycerin? I would love to hear from you. I'm Ryan from Ryan's Running Reviews, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Thanks.